Ladies and gentlemen, tonight, I share 4 chilling whispers from the shadows of reality. A camper vanished, his tent untouched. A child's laughter echoed through an abandoned asylum. A taxi picked up a woman who died a week before. A late-night janitor found notes and blood spelling his name. These are not legends. These are real, and they remind us, sometimes, the scariest monsters are human. Reality is often more terrifying than the wildest imaginations of fiction. In horror stories crafted for entertainment, we expect monsters, ghosts, and demons. We know there's a distance, a safe idea between us and the story. The characters are actors, the sets are fake, and the monsters are born from someone's creative mind. But when the terror comes from the real world, when the stories are based on actual events, the comfort of that distance disappears. We're left to confront the haunting truth that the world we live in is capable of horrors far beyond anything we could dream up. Consider the feeling of being alone in the woods. In a fictional tale, perhaps a werewolf is stalking in the distance, or some otherworldly force is toying with its prey. But in reality, what if a man went into those woods and never came back? His tent, perfectly arranged, undisturbed, his belongings untouched. No sign of struggle, no tracks, just absence, pure and chilling. No supernatural explanation, no climactic confrontation. Just the knowledge that something happened, something terrible, and we have no idea what it was. That kind of fear doesn't end when you close the book or shut off the screen. It lingers because it could happen to anyone. When stories like this emerge, they don't offer us the satisfaction of a resolution. We like our horror with endings, even if they're bleak. We want to see the villain defeated or at least explained. But reality doesn't work that way. A real camper disappearing leaves behind a mystery that won't be solved in 90 minutes. Families are left with questions instead of closure. Authorities search and speculate, but often, they never find answers. That unknown raw and unresolved is what gnaws at us. It's not the beast in the dark, but the silence that follows the scream. Then there are the places meant to be abandoned, places where laughter no longer belongs. A child's laughter echoing through an old, crumbling asylum doesn't require a ghost to be disturbing. It's the setting, the idea of innocence being out of place in a space defined by pain and neglect. When we hear of paranormal investigations catching sounds in such places, we may roll our eyes until we remember that many of these institutions were real. They housed people in brutal conditions, often neglected or abused. The fear here isn't in spectral activity, but in the history itself. The true horror lies in what people endured within those walls. There's something deeply unsettling about death being ignored, forgotten, or misunderstood. In the story of a taxi picking up a woman who had died a week before, many jump to ghosts and spirits. But in truth, such settings can come from trauma, grief, and the inability of the human mind to process loss. In some cases, drivers have reported encounters with people who were later confirmed to be deceased. Some of these stories traced back to events like natural disasters or tragedies. Whether they're hallucinations, psychological echoes, or something beyond explanation, the fact that people genuinely believe they interacted with the dead says something deeply disturbing about our connection to the unknown. The mind can bend to cope with grief in mysterious, sometimes frightening ways, and the world around us often doesn't confirm or deny what really happened. It just continues, leaving the witnesses to wonder. Working the night shift is unnerving on its own. The world feels quiet, the rules of daytime suspended. For a janitor to find notes written in blood with his own name spelled out is the sort of detail that sounds too cinematic to be real. But the reality behind such an account isn't always about blood or messages up. It's about being watched. It's about being alone in a place where you shouldn't be watched, where every noise echoes too loudly, where the security cameras glitch at just the wrong time. It's about that crawling sensation on the back of your neck when you're the only person supposed to be there, broken bar, and yet, you feel like you're not. These are not always stories of violent encounters, but psychological horror, the kind that chips away at your sense of safety in your own routine. The reason true scary stories strike a deeper chord is because they strip away the fiction and leave only the core of human vulnerability. We can protect ourselves from myths with logic, with locks on our doors, with rituals and lights. But when something happens in the real world, When someone vanishes without a trace, when people see things they can't explain, or when someone decides to do something unspeakable in the dead of night, there's no barrier left. It could be us, it could be now. The randomness of it all is part of the terror. There is no ancient curse to lift, no hero to call, no spell to cast. Just silence, confusion, and aftermath. True scary stories also tend to stick with us longer. They don't rely on elaborate plots or special effects. A single sentence can unsettle us for days. The last message on his phone said, "Hey, there's someone outside my tent." That alone conjures more fear than many full-length films. We know how it feels to be scared. We know how it feels to be alone. We know how it feels to suspect, just for a moment, that something is terribly wrong. And in these true stories, those feelings are not hypothetical. They're documented, they're reported. Sometimes, they're captured on recordings, heard in 911 calls, etched into diaries. These aren't scripts, they're records. And behind each story is a real person. A camper, a child, a driver, a janitor. Ordinary people, living ordinary lives. Until something shifted. We don't need the supernatural to feel dread. All we need is a situation that defies explanation and a reminder that life, at its darkest, is not bound by narrative logic. Reality doesn't ask permission to be terrifying. It just is. The stories we call true are often the most disturbing because they force us to confront the fact that we are not safe simply because we believe we are. Fiction gives us villains with motives. Reality gives us moments with no context, just cold fear and questions that remain unanswered. There's something about knowing that these stories happened in places we recognize, on roads we've traveled, in buildings like those we pass every day, to people who were just like us. That familiarity brings the horror closer. It's not about a faraway land or a haunted castle, it's about home, about numbers, about the small cracks in the normal world through which something unspeakable might slip. When a true story surfaces that carries horror with it, it doesn't fade when the telling ends. It follows us home. It changes the way we see the shadows. It teaches us to listen more carefully to silence, and to question comfort when it feels too easy. Horror, at its most potent, is not always about the unseen or the unexplained. While ghosts and monsters capture our imagination, the stories that linger the longest, the ones that truly disturb us, are those where the fear comes not from beyond the veil of life, but from within it. The human element of horror is what unsettles us on a deeper level because it strips away the safety of fantasy and points directly at our capacity for cruelty, for obsession, for madness, for violence. When the terror is rooted in humanity, it feels personal. It feels possible. Every culture has its tales of supernatural terror, creatures in the woods, spirits that haunt, curses that destroy. But beneath many of these legends lies a thread of human behavior that was so extreme or so inexplicable, it had to be wrapped in myth to be understood. What we call paranormal is often just a mask for our discomfort with what people are truly capable of. When someone disappears without a trace, the mind may leap to abduction by aliens or phantoms, but the reality is often far more disturbing. It's usually another person, someone watching, someone planning, someone real. True horror stories that center on human actions tend to strike us because they feel too close. A person vanishes after walking home late at night. A neighbor turns out to have kept secrets beneath their floorboards. A friendly stranger turns into something else entirely. We are unsettled because these things are not random. They are the result of choices made by individuals, often without warning. And when we're faced with the idea that someone could simply decide to end a life, to trap another person, to erase evidence and go on smiling in public, we realize how fragile the illusion of safety really is. Even more frightening is how ordinary the perpetrators often appear. They are not cloaked in shadow or marked by monstrous deformities. They wear uniforms, wave to numbers, have families, pay taxes. The darkness isn't always visible. It hides behind eyes that look just like yours. When horror rises from people, it challenges our instincts. We want to believe we can sense evil. We want to believe that bad people look a certain way, but they don't. And that truth is chilling. In each of the disturbing stories shared, it's the human choices, not ghosts or demons, that turn events terrifying. The camper vanishes. There's no sign of a creature, No tracks from anything unusual. What if it wasn't nature or a beast? What if it was a person, someone watching from the trees, someone who knew how to disappear? That possibility haunts us more than any mythical beast could. The lack of explanation isn't terrifying because it's mysterious. It's terrifying because it suggests that someone did something perfectly and got away with it. In the case of the child's laughter in the asylum, the horror may seem ghostly at first, but then we remember the history of such places, the countless children and adults who were institutionalized for reasons ranging from illness to inconvenience. Many of them suffered, some were never seen again. The idea that echoes of their lives remain is sad, but what's worse is the thought of what happened to them while they were still alive. Abuse, neglect, experiments. The horror was not in the ghost stories but in the records and the testimonies of those who survived. The laughter may not be a ghost, it may be memory, echoing through ruined hallways. The story of the woman picked up by the taxi a week after her death hits differently when we consider not whether it's a ghost, but what the driver must feel. The mind, faced with trauma or shock, can do strange things. Some of these drivers believed deeply in what they saw. They weren't making it up. But whether the woman was a spirit or a figment of a strained mind is not the only question. The deeper horror lies in how grief plays tricks, how memory and regret can manifest in ways that blur the line between what is real and what is perceived. It's not the ghost that frightens it. It's the idea that we might break under the weight of our own minds, haunted not by spirits, but by our own guilt and sadness. Then there's the janitor who found notes written in blood with his own name. It sounds like a horror movie setup, but even without supernatural elements, the scenario is disturbing. Who wrote the notes? Why target him? The idea that someone could have access, could enter your space without you knowing, could learn your routines and twist them into something malevolent. That's where the terror lies, not in a ghost but in a person who decided, for whatever reason, to play with another's fear. That level of control, that level of invasion, shows just how thin the walls of our personal worlds really are. And the worst part, you might never find out who did it or why. People can hide in plain sight. Sometimes, they never leave a trace. This type of horror, grounded in reality and shaped by human hands, is often less flashy than supernatural tales. There's no fire raining from the sky, no bones rising from graves, but it lingers longer. It seeps into the cracks of our daily lives. Every time we hear footsteps behind us on a dark street, every time we pass a stranger's glance, every time we realize we left a door unlocked, that fear creeps in, not because of monsters, but because of people. The reason these stories stay with us is because they challenge what we believe about our fellow humans. Most of us want to believe in good. We rely on kindness, on community, on trust. But these true stories fracture that trust. They show us that someone can smile at you and still wish you harm. They show us that the most violent or deranged minds don't wear signs. They pass unnoticed, until they act. What makes it all more disturbing is the randomness. Sometimes victims are chosen simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's no moral lesson, no cause and effect, just choice here on the part of the person who did harm. That randomness makes it feel uncontrollable. How do you protect yourself from someone who decides to act on their worst impulses with no warning? The human element of horror is not always violent, either. Sometimes it's emotional manipulation, psychological torment, quiet cruelty that wears people down over years. Abuse within families, cults masquerading as communities, friendships that turn toxic. These too are sources of fear. Real, intimate fear that shapes lives. These are not stories we tell around campfires. They happen in homes, schools, workplaces. They leave scars that don't show, but never fade. Ultimately, the most frightening truths are not that monsters exist, it's that they don't have to. People are capable of becoming them all on their own. And because we are all people, we are forced to admit that this darkness is not an external threat, it's internal. It's part of what it means to be human. The horror lies in choice, in what some choose to do, in what some choose to ignore, in what some choose to become.